She jerked her hand free just as the sheriff reached for her again, and the tall rancher beside the hitching rail spoke one quiet line. "Be my wife, or you won't make it past the county line." So why did he sound like he was asking for something he didn't believe in himself? The rope creaked against the post as she stepped back, dust rising around her boots. 3 men watched like they were waiting for her to slip. The sheriff tipped his hat, polite on the outside, closing in all the same. She didn't move, not yet. Across the street, the rancher straightened, slow and deliberate, like he had already decided something he wasn't ready to say out loud. His coat hung loose, sun-worn, and his eyes didn't leave hers. "You don't have much time," he said, quieter now. She glanced at the road, then back at him. It wasn't trust. It wasn't fear either. It was a choice. And she knew one of them would cost her more than she could see. "Tell me, would you take a stranger's offer when staying might mean losing everything?" The dust on Ironwood Bend's main street never really settled. It hung low, stirred by boots, wagon wheels, and the dry wind that came off the hills like it had somewhere better to be. Alma Reed stood in the middle of it, her wrist caught in a grip that didn't bother to hide what it was. Denton Crow held her like he owned the right. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, voice calm enough to pass for polite if you didn't hear the edge under it. Alma didn't pull away. Not yet. Her eyes stayed on his, steady, measuring, the kind of look that made people uncomfortable when they weren't used to being seen straight. Around them, the town slowed. A hammer stopped mid-swing at the blacksmith's. A pair of women outside the dry goods store went quiet. Even the horses tied along the rail shifted less. Denton smiled like he'd already decided how this would end. Alma moved. Her elbow drove back sharp and fast into his ribs. Not wild, not desperate, precise. The sound it made wasn't loud, but it carried. Denton's grip broke. Just enough. She stepped out of it, turned, and faced him again. Her carpet bag slipped from her hand and hit the dirt at her feet. She didn't reach for it. For a second, nothing moved. Then the crowd took a step back, like something invisible had pushed them. Denton straightened slowly, one hand pressed to his side. His face shifted, not anger first, but something colder, something that settled in before it showed. "You'll regret that," he said, softer now. Alma said nothing. He glanced at the bag at her feet, then back at her. His smile returned, thinner this time. "Job offer's gone," he added, "and word travels fast in a place like this." He turned just enough so the others could hear him without raising his voice. "No one here hires a woman who can't follow simple instruction." A few heads nodded without meaning to. Alma bent, picked up her bag, and brushed the dust off with one quick motion. She didn't look down while she did it. Then she turned her back on him. That was when the sound came back. Boots shifting, a cough, someone letting out a breath they hadn't realized they were holding. At the far end of the street, the livery stable stood open, shadowed against the light. A man leaned against one of the posts, hat low, one boot hooked behind the other. Harlan Boone. He hadn't moved through any of it. If you asked most folks in Ironwood Bend, they'd tell you he was the biggest man in 3 counties and the quietest. They'd say he worked hard, paid fair, and kept to himself. They'd also tell you not to cross him, though no one seemed able to say exactly why. He watched Alma now the way a man watches a storm roll in from a distance. Not surprised, not impressed, just paying attention. Alma walked past him, close enough to hear the creak of leather when he shifted his weight, close enough to catch the smell of hay and sun-warmed wood from inside the stable. She didn't slow. Behind her, 2 men peeled off from Denton's side. Not in a hurry. Not yet. Just moving with purpose. Alma kept walking. Her grip tightened on the handle of her bag until her knuckles went pale. The street stretched ahead, open and empty, leading down toward the watering trough and the road out past the ridge. No plan, no place to go, just forward. Boots sounded behind her now, closer. She didn't turn. Miss. The voice came from her left, low enough it didn't carry. She stopped. Harlan Boone hadn't raised his head. His gaze stayed somewhere out past the road, like he was talking to the dust instead of her. "If you keep going straight," he said, "they'll catch you by the trough." Alma didn't answer right away. The wind lifted a corner of her dress, then dropped it again. Behind her, the footsteps didn't slow. She turned her head just enough to look at him. Up close, he was broader than he'd seemed from across the street. Not just tall, solid, built by work, not by show. His face gave nothing away. "I don't know you," she said. "No," he agreed. Another step behind her, then another. He finally looked at her. "You got somewhere else to be?" he asked. Alma glanced toward the road, then back at the two men closing the distance behind her. Then she looked at Harlan Boone again. The stable door stood open behind him, shadows deep enough to swallow the light. He didn't offer his hand, didn't move toward her. Just waited. Alma shifted her grip on the bag. The wind picked up, carrying dust across the street in a thin, restless line. She could keep walking, or she could step into that shadow and see what came with it. Her shoulders squared, and then she moved. Not toward the road, toward him. Harlan didn't nod, didn't say a word. He just stepped aside, letting her pass into the shade of the stable. Behind them, the two men slowed. Too late. The light swallowed them as the doorframe cut the street away. Inside, it smelled like hay, leather, and something steady. Alma didn't look back. Not once. The light shifted as she stepped deeper into the stable. Dust and heat gave way to shade and the low, steady sounds of horses shifting in their stalls. Leather creaked. A fly buzzed against a wooden beam. Harlan Boone walked past her without hurry. He didn't check if she followed. She did. They moved through the back, past a half-open door where a boy, no more than 16, paused mid-sweep and stared. Harlan didn't introduce her. The boy didn't ask. Outside, a wagon stood already hitched, bales of hay stacked uneven across the bed. Harlan climbed up, took the reins, then glanced down at her. "Get in," he said. No urgency, just timing. Alma set her bag in first, then pulled herself up. The wood was rough under her palms. She settled near the back, knees drawn in slightly, keeping her distance. The wagon rolled before the dust outside the stable had time to settle. They didn't speak as they left Ironwood Bend. The town faded behind them, storefronts, hitching posts, the sound of voices swallowed by distance. The road stretched out pale and dry, cut between scrub brush and low hills that held no shade. The wind picked up. Alma watched the line of the road ahead. Then, after a while, she said, "You do this often?" Harlan didn't turn. "Do what?" "Pick up strangers with trouble behind them." A pause. "No." That was all. The wagon creaked. The horse's hooves struck a steady rhythm against packed earth. Alma shifted slightly, her hand resting on the edge of her bag. "Then why me?" Harlan adjusted the reins. Not much. Just enough. "They weren't asking questions," he said. "They were deciding." She let that sit. The sun moved higher. Heat pressed down. Somewhere along the ridge, a hawk circled slow and patient. They rode for what felt longer than it was. When the land began to rise, the air changed. Thinner, drier. A narrow stream cut through the rock ahead, glinting just enough to catch the eye. Juniper Ridge Ranch sat above it. Not large, not fancy. A long house with a sloped roof, a separate bunkhouse off to one side, and fencing that followed the land instead of forcing it. Harlan pulled the wagon to a stop near the gate. He stepped down first. Alma followed. Her boots hit the ground with a dull thud. She looked around once, quick but thorough. 6 men stood near the corral. Older, most of them, faces worn by sun and work. One of them, gray-bearded, nodded once when Harlan approached. "Wes," Harlan said. "That her?" the man asked. Harlan didn't answer right away. He looked back at Alma instead. "She cooks," he said finally. That seemed to settle it. Another man, younger, Eli, judging by the way Wes said his name, shifted awkwardly, gave Alma a small nod, then looked away. No one asked questions. Inside, the kitchen told its own story. A pot still sat on the stove, blackened at the bottom. A sack of flour leaned open, nearly empty. A cup with dried coffee sat by the window, ringed with dust. Alma set her bag down on the table. She moved through the room slowly, opened a cabinet, checked the shelf, ran a finger along the edge of the counter, and wiped it clean against her skirt without thinking. Behind her, Harlan leaned against the doorway. "I need someone to run this," he said. "Meals, supplies. Keep things steady." Alma didn't turn. "And what do I get?" she asked. "A roof," he said. "Wages when there's profit." She picked up the pot from the stove, turned it, set it down again. "And when there's not?" "Then we eat what we have." That earned the smallest pause. Alma glanced over her shoulder. "You always this generous?" she asked. "No," he said. She studied him a second longer. Then she turned back and reached for a cloth. By the time the sun dipped low enough to stretch shadows across the yard, the kitchen had changed. Not clean, not yet, but ordered. The pot was scrubbed. The flour was measured. Something simple simmered on the stove, filling the room with a smell that didn't belong to neglect. The men came in one by one. They sat, quiet. The first few bites passed in silence. Then a chair creaked. A throat cleared. "Been a while," Wes said, more to the table than anyone. Harlan ate without comment. Alma moved between them, refilling cups, setting down bread, picking up plates before they were empty. She didn't rush. Later, when the dishes were stacked and the last light slipped out of the sky, she sat alone at the table for a moment longer than necessary. Harlan stood in the doorway again. Same place. "You can take the room at the end of the hall," he said. She nodded once. Neither of them moved. Then, from outside, came the sound of hooves. Not one. More. Fast. Harlan stepped out before the sound reached the yard. Alma followed to the doorway, stopping just inside. 3 riders approached the gate, dust trailing behind them. She recognized one of the horses, recognized the man on it even more. Denton Crow didn't dismount. Harlan stood with one hand resting on the top rail of the fence. "Evening," Denton called, voice carrying easy across the yard. No answer. Denton's gaze slid past him, landed briefly on the doorway where Alma stood, then back again. "Heard you picked something up in town," he said. Harlan didn't move. "This is my land," he said. Not loud. Didn't need to be. The wind shifted, carried the smell of dry grass and something waiting. Denton smiled again, slower this time. "Everything has a cost," he said. "You know that." Harlan's hand tightened slightly on the rail. "Not tonight," he said. A pause stretched between them. Then Denton gave a small nod, turned his horse. The other 2 followed. They rode out the way they came, dust rising again behind them. Alma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Harlan didn't look back at her. He stayed where he was, watching the road long after it had emptied. The wind moved through the fence, rattling it just enough to be heard. Something had followed her out of town, and it hadn't stopped at the gate. Morning came thin and pale over Juniper Ridge. The wind had dropped sometime before dawn, leaving the air still enough that every sound carried farther than it should. Alma was already up. The stove clicked as it warmed. Coffee grounds settled slow in the pot. She moved through the kitchen with the same quiet rhythm as the day before, but her eyes drifted toward the window more often now. Boot prints still marked the dirt outside the fence. Not fresh, not gone either. Harlan stepped in without knocking, hat already on, sleeves rolled. He paused just inside, like he always did, like he was measuring the room before entering it. "Coffee's ready," Alma said, without turning. He poured it himself, didn't ask. They stood a few feet apart, each with a cup, neither speaking. Outside, Wes and Eli were already at the corral. The sound of rope against wood, low voices, a horse stamping. "3 of them yesterday," Alma said finally. Harlan nodded once. "They won't stop at 3. "No," he said. She turned then, leaned back against the counter, arms folded. "You planning to keep telling them it's your land?" she asked. "That's the truth. It won't be enough." He didn't argue. That was the thing about Harlan Boone. He didn't fill silence just to hear himself. Alma set her cup down. "They came with a deputy, she said. "That wasn't for show." "No. They come back with papers. They won't ask you." Harlan took a slow drink. "What do you suggest?" She held his gaze. "For them to leave me alone, I need to belong somewhere they can't question." His expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted. "You've got work here," he said. "That's not the same." "No." She pushed off the counter, took a step closer. "Men like Denton Crow don't pull a woman off a ranch if she's someone's wife," she said. "They make it a conversation instead of a grab." The word hung there, not loud, not hidden. Harlan looked past her for a moment, at the window, at the line of fence stretching down toward the ridge. Then back at her. "You're asking for a name," he said. "I'm asking for time." Silence again. Outside, a gate creaked open. Eli's voice carried, quick and unsure, then dropped. Harlan set his cup down. "I don't make promises I don't intend to keep," he said. "I'm not asking for promises." "What are you asking for?" Alma didn't answer right away. Then she said it plain. "Let me stand next to you where it counts." That landed differently. He drew in a breath, let it out slow. "I had an understanding once," he said after a while. "Didn't hold." Alma didn't press. "I'm not her," she said. "I know." "Then don't treat me like I am." That did it. Harlan nodded once. Not quick, not easy. "All right," he said. The word didn't sound big, but it settled heavy in the room. They didn't shake on it. Didn't write anything down. By noon, the news was already moving. The general store, the post window, the woman who kept ledgers for half the county. "Married quiet," Harlan said to anyone who asked. And because he said it the way he said everything, flat, certain, it stuck. That evening, the sky broke. Rain came fast and sideways, turning the yard into dark patches of mud and water. Alma ran for the barn with a bundle of feed, just as the first crack of thunder rolled over the ridge. She slipped halfway across the threshold. The ground gave under her boot. Harlan was there before the fall finished. One hand caught her arm. The other steadied her at the waist, holding her upright in a way that felt like it had been practiced, even if it hadn't. For a second, neither of them moved. Rain hit the roof hard enough to drown out everything else. Alma's hand stayed on his sleeve longer than it needed to. She noticed the roughness of the fabric, the warmth underneath. He noticed it too. Their eyes met. Close now. Too close for strangers. Too close for something that was supposed to be practical. The moment stretched, then broke. The kiss came quick, not planned, not careful. It was there and gone in the same breath, like something that had slipped past both of them before they could stop it. They stepped back almost at the same time. Rain kept falling, loud, steady. Alma turned away first, brushing damp hair from her face. "That wasn't part of the agreement," she said. "No," Harlan answered. Neither of them tried to explain it. By morning, the rain had cleared. The ground smelled clean, the air sharper. But something else had changed. At the far end of the ridge, a rider stopped just long enough to look down at the ranch before turning back the way he came. And in town, Denton Crow heard the word married. This time, when he smiled, it didn't reach his eyes. What had been simple was no longer simple, and whatever they had just set in motion wasn't going to stay contained. The next morning carried a different kind of quiet. Not the steady kind Alma had come to expect from the ridge. This one felt held back, like something waiting just out of sight. She noticed it in the way Eli checked the road twice before heading to the corral, in how Wes took his time tying off the gate, then looked past it longer than necessary. Harlan said nothing. He moved through the yard like always, measured, deliberate. But he didn't linger anywhere. Didn't stop to watch the ridge. Didn't need to. By noon, the news arrived. It came in the form of a rider who didn't belong to the ranch. The man pulled up slow, dust settling around his boots as he dismounted. His coat was city-made, darker than the land around it. Worn, but not from this kind of work. Alma saw him first from the kitchen window. She didn't need a second look. Marcus Blythe had a way of carrying himself that didn't change with distance. He stepped onto the porch like he had business there. Harlan met him before the door could open. They stood face to face, neither stepping back. "Didn't expect to see you this far west," Marcus said, voice smooth, almost pleasant. "You're not expected," Harlan answered. Marcus smiled, but it didn't stay. "I hear you've taken in someone from Denver," he said. "Small world?" Harlan didn't move. Inside, Alma wiped her hands on a cloth that had already gone dry. She stepped out onto the porch. Marcus's eyes found her immediately. Recognition settled in slow, then sharpened. "Well," he said softly, "there you are." No one spoke for a second. The wind picked up just enough to move the edge of Alma's sleeve. "You've been telling stories," she said. "Only the ones worth telling." Harlan's gaze shifted between them once, not asking, not interrupting. Marcus took a step closer. Not enough to crowd, just enough to change the space. "She left without notice," he said, still looking at Harlan. "Money unaccounted for, questions unanswered." Alma didn't raise her voice. "I left because you changed the terms," she said. Marcus's smile returned, thin. "Terms can be flexible." "Not those." Something passed through Harlan's expression. Quick, gone just as fast. He looked at Alma. "One question," he said. She met his eyes. "No," she said. That was all. Harlan nodded once. Then he stepped forward, just enough to close the space Marcus had opened. "You've said what you came to say," he told him. Marcus held his ground for a moment longer. Then he glanced toward the yard. "Fine piece of land," he said. "Would be a shame if it got complicated." His gaze drifted to the fence line, then back again. He turned and walked off the porch without waiting for a reply. The horse carried him away slow. He didn't look back. The yard stayed still long after he was gone. That evening, the sky cleared into a hard, empty blue. Alma worked in the kitchen with more force than usual. Not loud, just enough that things set down a little firmer than they needed to. Harlan stayed outside. When he came in, the light had gone soft. He stopped at the doorway again. Same place. Fence line's been cut, he said. She turned. Where? South End, near the creek. She didn't ask how bad. They both knew what it meant. Water didn't move the way it was supposed to when the fence was broken. Lines shifted. Claims followed. Alma set the knife down. That wasn't him, she said. No. But it's connected. Yes. The room fell quiet again. Later, after the others had eaten, Alma found a folded envelope waiting near the back door. No name on the outside. The paper inside was thin. Careful. The handwriting unsteady, but deliberate. She read it once. Then again. When Harlan came in, she handed it to him without explanation. He read slower than she had. Took his time with each line. Clara Blythe, he said. His wife. Harlan looked up. She's in Willow Creek, Alma said. Says she'll come. Says she'll speak if it comes to that. He folded the letter back along its crease, held it for a second longer than necessary. Outside, the wind shifted again, the kind that carried colder air down from higher ground. Alma leaned against the table. This wasn't chance, she said. Harlan didn't answer. She pushed off the table and walked to the window, looked out toward the ridge where the fence ran thin against the land. He didn't find me here, she went on. He came because I was here. That landed. Harlan stepped closer. Not enough to crowd, just enough to stand beside her instead of across from her. Denton's been looking at that water line for months, he said. And I gave him a reason. You gave him an opening, Harlan corrected. She glanced at him. That doesn't make it better. No, he said, but it makes it clearer. The fence, the writer, the letter, all of it lined up now, not random, not separate, one thing leading to another. Alma folded her arms. So what now? She asked. Harlan looked out over the land. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he said, Now we stop letting him move first. The wind picked up again, stronger this time. It rattled the loose boards along the fence just enough to be heard from the house. And somewhere beyond the ridge, a horse moved where it hadn't been before. By morning, the sky had gone clear and sharp again, like the storm had never passed through. Harlan was already at the south fence. Alma followed the line of it later, boots picking careful steps along the broken stretch. The wire had been cut clean, not torn, not weathered. Done with purpose. The creek below it ran just a little off from where it should. Not enough for a stranger to notice. Enough for a man who knew land to see trouble coming. Harlan drove a post into the ground with steady force, each strike measured, no wasted motion. You fix it? Alma said, standing a few steps back. He cuts it again. Maybe, he answered. That's not a plan. He set the hammer down. No, he said. It's time for one. She watched him pick up the wire, pull it tight. You're taking this to town, she said. Yes. Not just the fence. No. They didn't say Denton's name. Didn't need to. By noon, the wagon was ready. Wes stayed behind. Eli watched them go with something like worry sitting plain on his face. The road into Ironwood Bend looked the same as it had days ago, but it didn't feel the same. People noticed them this time. Not just Harlan. Both of them. Eyes followed. Conversations lowered as they passed. Inside the clerk's office, the air smelled like paper and ink and old wood. A man with thin hair and a careful manner looked up from behind a desk stacked with ledgers. "Mr. Boone," he said. "Didn't expect—" "I need to file," Harlan said. The man nodded quickly, pulled a book closer. Alma stood beside Harlan, not behind him, close enough their shoulders nearly touched. Harlan laid it out plain: fence cut, water line disturbed, names where he had them. No raised voice, no wasted words. The clerk's pen scratched across the page. "You understand," the man said carefully. "This makes it public." "That's the point." The pen paused, then continued. Alma watched the ink dry on the page. Something about it felt heavier than it should. When they stepped back outside, Denton was already there. Not waiting, just present. Marcus stood a few feet behind him. Different posture now, less certain. Denton's gaze moved from Harlan to Alma and back again. "You're pushing this further than it needs to go," he said. Harlan didn't stop walking. "Already filed," he said. That was all. Denton's jaw tightened just enough to notice. "You think a piece of paper changes anything?" he asked. Harlan turned then. "Not the paper," he said. "The record." Silence stretched between them. Marcus shifted his weight. Denton looked past them toward the clerk's door, then back again. "This isn't finished," he said. "No," Harlan answered. "It is." They walked past him, didn't wait for a reply. The town felt smaller on the way out, like it had closed in around something it didn't fully understand yet. By the time they reached the ridge again, the light had softened. Late afternoon, long shadows across the land. They didn't speak for most of the ride. The wagon creaked. The horse kept its steady pace. Alma watched the line of the creek as it came back into view. Then she said, "What happens when he pushes harder?" Harlan didn't answer right away. "He will," she added. "Yes. And when he does?" He pulled the reins slightly, slowing the wagon as they reached the rise above the ranch. He stopped there, looked out over the land. The house, the fence, the line of trees that barely held against the wind. "I don't want to go back to what it was before," he said. She looked at him. He didn't look at her. "Before you got here," he went on. "Before any of this." Alma rested her hand on the edge of the wagon. Didn't say anything. The wind moved through the grass below them. Soft. Steady. "You don't have to," she said after a moment. He nodded once. That small, deliberate motion she was beginning to understand. She looked out over the same stretch of land. The creek had settled back into its path. The fence line, even broken, still held its shape. Nothing was fixed yet, but nothing had been taken either. Alma adjusted her grip on the wood beside her. Then she stayed where she was. Didn't step down. Didn't turn away. The wagon sat quiet on the ridge a little longer than necessary, and when Harlan finally set the reins again and guided the horse forward, it wasn't back to something old. It was toward something they hadn't named yet, and neither of them tried to. The sun dropped slow behind the ridge, laying long shadows across the land that had nearly been taken from them. The fence still bore the marks of what had been done to it. The creek ran quiet again, like it had decided to stay. Harlan didn't say much as they rode back. He never did. But his hand rested a little steadier on the reins, like a man who had stopped bracing for something that hadn't come. Alma sat beside him, not looking at him, not looking away either. Just there, like she had made her choice without needing to announce it. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for the ground to feel safe beneath their feet. Others learn to stand anyway, even when it isn't. And sometimes, if they're lucky, they find someone who stands with them, Not to carry the weight, but to share it. What held them there wasn't a promise spoken out loud, not a paper filed in a dusty office. It was something quieter, something built in small decisions, in staying, in not turning back. Maybe that's what love looks like out here. Not grand, not loud, just steady enough to hold. If you had to choose, would you walk away while you still could? Or stay and build something that might cost you everything? If this story stayed with you, there are more like it waiting. Stories about people who didn't have much, but chose anyway.